Welcome, everyone. My name's Aline Sigler. I'm with Provider Outreach and Education here at WPS. Also on the line with me today is Karen Curtis. She's serving as my co-host. I appreciate her assistance today, helping me stay on track and monitor the chat for me. We want to thank you for joining us. Today we'll be talking about third-party partnerships. What does that mean? The purpose of this session is to obtain the knowledge and the tools needed to protect patient information, mitigate legal risks, and help reduce Medicare costs. WPS and other contractors across the country that we talk with are noticing an increase in the volume of inquiries to customer service that are duplicative, erroneous, or inappropriate in some way. So this is our opportunity to make everyone aware of that and provide education to get rid of any misunderstandings about the regulations, to increase awareness of places where there are some vulnerabilities perhaps to PHI. And we also want to decrease Medicare funds being spent on administrative tasks that are related to unnecessary calls and other claims processing activities. So what we're going to cover in this session is we're first going to start out with a review of the legal responsibilities of providers who contract with third-party entities. Then we're going to take a look at some common third-party trends that have been identified. We're going to examine some questions to ask when contracting with third-party billers. And then we're going to conclude by answering the question, what resources are available? If you're familiar at all with the Medicare program, it's a very fluid program. It changes a lot. So no one expects you to memorize the regulations. It's more about where to go to find the answers that you need when you need them. The content of this presentation is not intended to imply all third-party contractors are engaged in inappropriate activities or practices, rather to just bring awareness to the situations that we're noticing and that can help prevent some of the issues that we've noticed, and as a learning experience for all of us here. So before we go into details, let's go over a couple definitions. And the first one is the definition of a third party. When we talk about third party companies, we're referring to any organization you as the provider or your corporation contracts with that isn't a direct member of your business. This could be billing agencies, clearinghouses, software vendors, or even auditing firms. Like all businesses, most third-party companies do excellent work for providers. But there are other people who are, let's call them bad actors, that look for ways to take advantage of their providers. This training focuses on the latter of these companies. And as I stated before, it's designed to assist you with making positive choices when selecting who you wish to contract with for clearinghouses, billing companies, etc. So now that we've provided an introduction to the focus of our training, I want to discuss the legal responsibilities of a provider when using third-party agencies of any kind. While the topic of this presentation is about third-party companies, it's really important to note that CMS does not make a distinction between third-party billing agencies and the provider. All actions taken by a provider's employees, including those that are contracted by third-party agencies, are the responsibility of the provider. So if I say third party agency, party billing agencies, I'm kind of lumping all of those entities together as third parties. So any third party of some sort that you employ, that you give power to as far as certain aspects of your business or your practice, you are responsible for their actions. And so we're just trying to caution you to make good choices, know what's going on, and provide that oversight. Because, Medicare does consider them one and the same. If you employ them, you are responsible for their actions. So because of this, any negative actions that are taken by a third party company will fall back on the provider, because the provider, and when I say you, I mean providers or facilities, you're the one seeking reimbursement from Medicare. We recommend taking steps to ensure that you and your billing parties are in compliance with Medicare regulations. And so we've broken this down into 3 steps here. And the first one is identify how your third-party entities protect your data. This includes your patients and your enrollment and your financial information. How much power does that third party need to fulfill the responsibilities that are outlined in your contract? Step 2, understand how those third parties can ensure accurate and timely submission of claims, appeals, whatever tasks they are assigned by you. Do they have a fairly comprehensive understanding of Medicare regulations, at least for the types of services that you provide? Private insurance is very different from Medicare in some aspects. So if they assure you that they know how to bill insurance, they know how to follow up on claims and things like that, make sure you ask those probing questions to determine their understanding of Medicare regulations. Do you provide training if they need it, or are they responsible for that themselves? That's another thing that maybe you want to be sure of. And then finally, step 3, determine your contractual charge structure, including any fees the third party will be charging you. We have some examples shown here. Will you be charged additional fees for additional tasks that have to be completed? Having this laid out clearly in the contract not only protects you, but that third party also, and prevents misunderstandings and unpleasant surprises. Providers are legally obligated to identify the risk and impact involved with third-party vendors. This slide here contains some resources for identifying risk. If you've downloaded a copy of the slide deck, or you're going to, you'll have the links here where you can go out and look at these and read more about this. If you're listening to this course as an encore, as a recording, you're going to scroll down in the description of the video, and that's where you'll find the links here. So the first one is the HIPAA Privacy Rule Business Associates Guidance. This is a good reference for you to get started. The second one is the Compliance Program Guidance for Third-Party Medical Billing Companies. That is within the Federal Register, so you can scroll down and find that and read more about those legal responsibilities for identifying risk. Now, sprinkled throughout this presentation, we have some real-life examples. So we've incorporated some of these case studies to help illustrate certain points within the presentation. So on this one, we have an example of a provider who shared their experience with us. It was a medical group. They hired a physician. The group uses a third-party vendor to handle their enrollment process, so their accreditation. They also are charged with handling all their claims submission activities. So this isn't uncommon. This is very common for providers and facilities to do this. This is a medical group. The vendor enrolled the physician as a solo practitioner, not a member of a group. The vendor also made mistakes when submitting the physician's claims, which in turn caused denials and rejections, but they didn't refund Medicare. So either they didn't know that they were supposed to do that, that was part of their contract, and so that's where, that misunderstanding may have come in there. Or it could be that they just didn't. We don't know that. So because of these rejections and denials and Medicare being owed money, the physician's tax refunds were garnished up until the point that amount that was a debt to Medicare was repaid. So that's an example that we've heard of, and why it's important to lay out those responsibilities and identify that risk on the front end to try to prevent these things from happening. So that was just a little bit about some of the legal responsibilities that you have when using third parties. So now what we want to do is we want to discuss some trends that we've seen and why we feel this type of training is crucial. Why are we having this conversation today? So we're going to look at the issue that's been identified, and then we'll discuss the impact that it has to everyone involved here. And the first one is MAC education attempts. And where this comes from is a CMS requirement. CMS requires all MACs to track all inquiries. So every call that comes in, every piece of written correspondence, all of those things come into our office, and we're required to track them all. And we regularly report common trends that we're noticing. It's also an expectation that the MACs will then educate providers based on those trends. Again, this is why we're here today talking about this topic. After education has taken place, so we've notified you that, hey, you're doing XYZ and we need you to stop, or there's a misunderstanding identified, so we educate on where those regulations are, where they can see that they have to do it a certain way. CMS requires MACs to report to them specific providers who aren't in compliance with education. There is a place where you can go to read more about these requirements. It's an internet-only manual. It's 100-09, which, if you've been around Medicare for a while, is maybe one that you're not as familiar with. It's the Medicare Contractor, Beneficiary, and Provider Communications Manual. I'll have Karen place a link to that in the chat if she hasn't already. Section 30.4.8 is where you can read about those requirements for MACs to identify trends and report them to CMS. So with our common trends, here's an issue that we've noticed. It's when we attempt to contact providers about the inquiries. The provider's office often doesn't recognize the phone number or the name of the individuals who have been calling our office. So this is alarming to us for a number of reasons, but it means that these providers don't know who has their patient's PHI. So if we've needed to contact a provider, let's say, I'm just going to use an example, we've received a redetermination request, and either it's incomplete, it's invalid, we need more information, something like that. So we've contacted what we thought was the provider's office with the name and the number that was, let's say, on the form or on the letter, and it goes nowhere. So we've contacted the hospital's I'm just using the hospital as an example, the hospital's switchboard, let's say, and nobody in the billing office knows who that person is. It could be a third party. It could be, we're noticing a lot of providers using artificial intelligence, but it's concerning because that means not only is the patient information, but the facility information, information about payments and such is out in the world somewhere, uncontrolled. And so that is alarming. So what's the impact of this? Well, I've already kind of alluded to it. If you're not the one calling or you're not the one sending the letter, how does this impact you? Well, without a direct line of communication and knowledge of who exactly has your patient's PHI, there's an increased risk of PHI breaches, of course, and abusive billing practices. Remember, as the provider, you're held accountable for all actions taken by your third-party contracts. So unfortunately, any abusive billing or use of PHI does fall back on you. We have another real-life example here from a provider who shared their experience about their third-party agency. A physician hired a third-party vendor to handle all their claims and appeals. The vendor's payment was a percentage of the Medicare reimbursement. Somewhere along the line, Medicare requested additional documentation, but the vendor did not respond. So this resulted in thousands of dollars in denials and recoupments that the physician was liable for. The physician is responsible for taking any legal or court action against the vendor. So let's say there was a lot of money that needed to be paid back to Medicare. The payment to the vendor was based on Medicare reimbursement, but then when money got recouped from Medicare, no money came back to the provider from the vendor. And I don't have the whole picture, but that's kind of the gist of it there. And so we wanted to just bring this to the forefront, make you aware of these are the types of things that we're hearing about and that are happening. Our next common trend is a lack of access to self-service. So this is where third-party companies don't have access to all the tools that they need to complete their job within CMS's expectations. Among these resources is our self-service portal, remittance advices. A lot of third-party companies are using spreadsheets or reports that either don't contain all the necessary information, or by the time the third party gets them, they're outdated. I'm thinking of a third party and a provider who was basing their claims corrections off of a report from direct data entry, and it was being mailed to them. And by the time they were getting it, those claims either were not in that status location anymore, or they didn't have the same reason code on them, and so they didn't have what they needed to do the job that they were tasked with. Another example that we've heard about is that they're using internal software to verify patient eligibility, which might not be up to date, might not be accurate. On this slide, there's a link to that same manual and chapter that we referenced a few slides back. And this time it's sections 50 and 50.1 that talk about the required use of self-service tools, because it is required by CMS. So what are the impacts of this trend? As you can see here, without these essential tools, it may often take longer for you to receive your appropriate reconciliation of your claims, and we don't want that. You also run the risk of possibly missing important timelines if the people who are doing claims follow-up or claims correction or whatever for you aren't able to see those claims, track that status, maybe didn't notice that there was an additional documentation request pending and the deadlines were missed. Our next trend is one that's directly affecting providers, and it's an increase in common errors. These errors include submitting duplicate claims, claims repeatedly being submitted with the same error, and or incorrect forms being used. A lot of these errors can be avoided by using those self-service tools. The impact of this trend is that it can result in you not receiving your payments for your claims or failing audits if documentation is not properly stored and available. Depending on your contract with that third-party entity, it could also result in additional charges for you. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So let's take a look at this third real-life example. In this one, we have a provider who has a third party that's overseeing their claims. There were a lot of claims denied, and the third party appealed, and I have quotes around that because that's what they thought they were doing. They appealed. Instead of sending a redetermination request, they submitted reopenings. So all the requests went to the appeals department, and they were dismissed because they weren't truly appeals. They weren't appealable things, and so that put the provider in a difficult situation for timely submission of redetermination requests. So this has occurred with multiple providers. It was supposed to be a reopening, but it was submitted as a redetermination or vice versa. And while we attempted to educate those companies about ensuring that they fill out the requests properly, this issue persists. It's a continuous issue that we see. And again, it could happen in reverse too. A redetermination is requested on a billing error that should be corrected with a clerical error reopening. The requests go to different staff in separate departments. One goes to the claims area, one goes to the appeals area. So it just holds up your processing. It causes unnecessary rework. And so it would be better to get this ironed out so that it can be handled appropriately. And again, it might be a terminology thing. It might be that other insurances or group insurances call those procedures different things. But again, we want to avoid those. Perhaps one of the largest trends that we're seeing is an increase of scripted calls. So this is just what it sounds like. It's when the caller on the other line is a person, but they ask a series of scripted questions on every single inquiry. For example, they'll ask for the provider's mailing address on every inquiry, even though they already have that information, or they ask why a claim is denied when the bill contains a modifier indicating that an advanced beneficiary notice of non-coverage or ABN was given. So sometimes the questions that they're asking don't make sense for the situation or don't make sense at all. Sometimes they ask questions that don't relate to that claim at all. Like I said, asking if the max mailing address is the same, even though all of the bills were sent electronically. So these additional calls might not seem like a big deal, might not seem like they impact a provider's office, but what they do is increase both practice expenses and Medicare costs. Medicare is funded through U.S. tax dollars, so any additional cost placed on a MAC is then passed down to the taxpayers, such as the provider and their businesses. Another concern is that many third-party companies will charge you per call, per question asked, or per minute spent on the phone. So these types of things could result in these companies purposely making extra calls so that they can increase their fees to you. Another impact of repeat calls is that CMS may get involved. They may revoke your office's access to our contact center. We could be instructed to block their number. Within 100-09, again, that's the Beneficiary and Provider Communications Manual, Chapter 6, 30.4.8, which is the same manual reference that Karen gave you in the chat a few minutes ago. That's the section that outlines these regulations. It states, MACs shall monitor their incoming calls for non-compliant callers who refuse to use self-service resources, who repeatedly ask same or similar questions despite educational efforts, or who are disrespectful to customer service representatives. And those were CMS's words. Now we have one final real life example that I want to share with you. This comes to us from a provider. WPS received over 100 calls per month on behalf of a certain provider for inquiries that could have been resolved via self-service tools. Many inquiries included scripted questions, which resulted in longer wait times for other callers needing assistance. This particular provider is in jeopardy of being reported to CMS for abusive practices. They could also use their calling privileges. So that would mean that when you really did have a question that you needed help with or needed to have researched, you wouldn't be able to do that by calling our office because of the situation that this third party put you in. So now that we've identified and discussed the trends that WPS has noticed, now let's think about questions to ask your vendors and contractors that you work with to help avoid what could result in negative situations for you. And the first question is to always ask the company that's going to handle your patient's PHI is, who will they have billing your claims and reviewing your patient's PHI information? These questions should include asking if your vendor is also using a third party and who specifically they have reviewing your PHI information. What steps did they have in place to protect your data and that of your patient? Are they sending information overseas? That leads to our next major question. Is the vendor using any subcontractors? Electronic health information that's processed or stored outside of the United States has a greater risk and vulnerability for unauthorized disclosure and potential security breaches. This slide has a resource for you where you can read more about this topic, and it's within the Code of Federal Regulations. And you can go down to, scroll down to section 164.308 and actually find that reference if you want to read more about that. After finding out who has access to your claims and PHI information, the next question might be to find out what direct line of communication do you have with these individuals. As we stated earlier, this is a known problem that we've experienced when we've needed to contact someone in relation to claims and appeals. We suggest being proactive, making sure that a process is in place from the get-go. Also, how do you expect the vendor to notify you of any denials, claim rejections, or other claim issues that require follow-up from you as the provider? After you know who will be handling your claims and patient PHI information and how to reach them, the next question might be is, what are they charging you for their services? Do they charge a percentage of what you get paid from Medicare? Are there other fees? Is there a chance that they might be upcoding your claims, changing diagnosis codes, or adding charges without your knowledge to increase reimbursement, especially if they get paid a percentage of your Medicare reimbursement? Do you get a refund of their fees if Medicare adjusts or recoups your initial payment? What what are their parameters for that situation? Do they charge per phone call or per hour of work? We have heard from some providers that many third-party companies charge the provider for each phone call they make or each question that they ask Medicare. Again, if something is improperly paid, do they refund all or part of the fee that you've paid them? After you have the major questions discussed, is it then an appropriate time to discuss the controls that the billing agency or the third party has in place to protect both you and your patient's financial and private interests? Are they thoroughly reviewing claims before making any sort of resubmission? I noticed with appeals, it seems like the second that a service, a line, or a claim is denied, that we're getting some kind of generic redetermination requests asking us to reconsider the decision. And so I wonder if it's actually possible that someone reviewed that to know if it even was an appealable denial or if that is automatically being sent. And I want to caution you about that. Another one of the common trends that we see from some providers is continuously resubmitting the same claim and it hitting with the same errors. So that tells me that nobody is investigating those claims to see what's incorrect or missing before just dropping a new claim to us. And that results in higher fees, not only for you, the provider, and lack of Medicare payment to cover those fees. And I'm thinking of duplicate denials. Even though a claim rejects as a denial and no money is paid to the provider, it still costs money to process that unpaid claim. So the Medicare program could view this as abuse or waste, and that is not a situation that you want to put yourself in. Earlier, we mentioned lack of access to self-service tools as one of the common trends that we're noticing. And this is important because, just as we stated, they need to be able to thoroughly review the denial reasons. So are they using the proper tools to research and resolve those denials or rejections or edits, whatever the case may be? You know, as a provider, you have to grant permission to the third parties so that they can access the Medicare systems and applications on your behalf. Remember that CMS does not allow sharing of accounts and passwords. So it is your responsibility, and this is for your protection, to have users added and removed as needed. Whether that's to our Secure Net Access portal called SNAP, which is our secure online provider portal, or if you're a Part A provider, that's direct data entry. Make sure that if someone leaves and no longer needs that access, that it is removed immediately. Another question that you'll want to ask your current or potential third-party companies is, for members of their staff that are unfamiliar with the self-service tools, what training are the people working on Medicare expected to complete? Does this training ensure that they're properly knowledgeable on all tools in addition to Medicare guidelines? And who determines if that training is adequate? And finally, ask questions about what you expect of them and how you will enforce compliance with those expectations. What are the consequences if expectations are not met? Who is responsible financially for recoupments? Do they understand your legal responsibilities regarding HIPAA, repayment to Medicare, fraud, abuse, and possible revocation from the Medicare program? Medicare holds you, the provider, liable. So there should be clear documentation on performance expectations and what consequences will occur if they are unable to fulfill their duties properly with you. The final section of our presentation today is going to cover training to share with your staff and vendors. An appropriate call is an inquiry that cannot be resolved via self-service tools like the portal, the IVR. You've seen that on a couple of slides. It stands for Interactive Voice Response. The remittance advice, WPS's website, CMS's websites. Any and all inquiries that can be resolved via self-service tools have to be referred to those respective tools. And that's not a WPS rule, that's a CMS rule. Use of self-service technology enables the provider contact centers to more efficiently handle provider calls by following and allowing providers access to certain information without direct personal assistance from our staff. MACs will turn away providers calling for any inquiry that's available via self-service, and that frees up the phone lines for those more complex inquiries. The link on this slide, again, takes you to those regulations within the MAC Beneficiary and Provider Communications Manual. This is where CMS states that provider self-service tools are required for MACs to have and required for providers to use. Next resource is the remittance advice. So when a claim processes, an RA will be released to the provider, and it gives details of payments, rejections, denials. So when you're reviewing a denial, it's important to always review both the CARC, the Claim Adjustment Reason Codes, and the RARCs, the Remittance Advice Remarks Codes. The CARC codes are the codes that indicate who's responsible. So they assign liability. The RARC codes, which can be found on the top right and the left-hand side of the claim, then give further explanation as to why the claim or the service denied. By reviewing both sets of codes, the CARCs and the RARCs, it becomes much easier to determine the reason for the denial and determine any possible follow-up activities like appeals. So in this example that we have here in the screenshot, the claim has a CO16, which is claim or service lacks information or has submission/billing error. So initially this seems rather vague until you look at the RARC, which states there's something wrong with the patient's Medicare number. So this claim could be corrected and resubmitted. The remittance advice also lists crossover insurance details if the claim crossed over to a secondary insurance. It may identify a local or national coverage determination that the claim denied against, and that can give you additional clues as to the reason for the denial and then the next steps to take. Another resource is the provider portal. And we want to mention that today. It's our Secure Net Access portal known as SNAP. The portal's critical for reviewing claims, checking patient eligibility, sending a redetermination request. So a lot of different tasks there. So a lot of those different tasks are listed here. And we also have a link at the bottom of this slide to the portal user manual. And with that portal, we are constantly working on enhancements to it. So if you or your third party don't use the portal, I think we should definitely check it out because it is real time. You can look at your claims and get a lot of more information, which is up next here. If you have an account, you're a registered user, and you've been in the portal, you might have seen this more info button. And the more info button provides additional details about the claim. On institutional and provide could be next to each claim detail line. When the button appears next to the claim line, the information might include the rendering provider name, rendering provider NPI, the ANSI, which stands for American National Standards Institute, reason or remarks codes. It could link you to a related claim. Let's say if your claim rejected as a duplicate or an overlap, it could tell you which claim it was, for lack of a better word, hitting up against. Also, patient eligibility information. Institutional claims could also include a more info button next to a claim level reason code, meaning a reason code that applies to the entire claim or at the line level. Enhanced denial information might be available, and if so, it could give you additional information explaining that denial. It could give you guidance for correcting the claim. It could link you to articles or web pages that contain information that could apply to your claim or your denial situation. And then there could be claim action buttons for correcting the denial, whatever the case may be. And so this is another reason why working in SNAP could really benefit you, and if you decided that you wanted them to, your third-party contracts. We also have a reason remark code lookup tool on our website, and it allows you to search for a particular code, which then explains how a claim denied or gives you insight on how to correct a pending error. So we've developed this tool. It's located on our website. It's in the tools section. So in the top navigation, you see the tools right here. If you clicked on that in the drop down, you could go to all tools and then scroll down to this tool. We have a direct link to it down here at the bottom of this slide. So as we think about all that we've talked about today, there are some key concepts that I want to make sure that you leave with. And first, you as the provider are legally responsible for all the actions that are taken by your employees and any company you contract with. Essentially, a third-party vendor is your employee. Next, make sure you have clear lines of communication and clear expectations for all your employees and vendors, because those are key factors to avoid some of these reconciliation issues and trends that we've been seeing. And then finally, ensuring that your employees and your vendors have access to the proper tools and the education materials that they'll need. That's really critical. So that brings me to the end of the prepared material. So I'm going to check in with Karen. I want to see if we have any questions in the chat. Karen, have we received anything?
Thank you for all that great information, Aline. As of right now, we do not have any questions in the chat.
Okay, thank you for checking, and I appreciate your help today, adding those details and links and things. So we're going to move on here. I would ask that you take a few minutes after this webinar is over to complete a survey about this course. We give you quite a few options here, so it really just depends on what your preference is. You can use the link that Karen's going to place in the chat, or when you exit the webinar, you'll be asked to go to an external site. And the external site is the CMS Qualtrics page for the survey. And the message is going to look similar to the picture here on the right side of the slide with the triangle and the continue button. So if you click on continue, that'll just open the survey for you. I know that if you've never seen that message before, it doesn't seem clear as to what it is, why you're seeing it, or where it wants to take you. And so we're trying to clarify that for you. If you're listening to this course as an encore, you're going to get a box, and it's going to look like the other picture here with the finger and the stars. That is a link that you can use during the encore to take you to the survey. Or if you scroll down in the description of the video, right before you get to that list of resources, you'll find the link listed there. So those surveys are so important to us because that's how you give us insight into how we're doing, but it also gives us insight into the types of education that you're interested in. What topics do you want to hear more about that we can put on our list of possible topics for education? Now, in a few minutes, in 5 or 10 minutes, you're going to receive an email, and it's going to thank you for attending. But it's also important that you read it before you delete it, because this email contains your certificate of achievement. So it has your name and your contact hours and the name of this course. So if you need to turn it in for credit towards continuing education units, you have it. If you don't see it, again, it should come in 5 or 10 minutes. Check your junk or your spam folder. Make sure you have the WebEx email address on your safe sender list so that you can get these, especially if that's what you're interested in, is getting continuing education. On behalf of myself, Karen, everybody in Provider Outreach and Education, thank you for the good work that you do. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your interest in learning more about the Medicare program. We hope to have you join us for future education. We look forward to your survey feedback, and you may now disconnect. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.